Our second panel, Victory for the People of Ukraine, What is Needed? We're going to have four distinguished panelists. Ambassador Herbst, former ambassador to Ukraine and the head of the center at the Atlantic Council, the Eurasian Center. Debra Cagan, who has had top positions in state and defense, is a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, one of the most informed people on the planet about where weapons are, what their capabilities are, and so forth. And General Phil Breedlove, former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And then we're going to now have General Wes Clark, also former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Both Ambassador Herbst and Debra are under severe time constraints. So we will start with them and then continue our discussion. John, do you want to start, please?
Sure. Look, since the big invasion, the administration established a policy framework, which is a very sound one, of big-time arms to Ukraine, major sanctions on Russia, and strengthening substantially NATO in the East. That's the right framework. The problem is that the administration has not pursued a clear goal of, you could say, either Russian defeat or Ukrainian victory within that framework. And that's played out most importantly on the issue of weapons supply to Ukraine. But it actually goes to the whole notion of explaining and justifying American policy to the American people to ensure their support for what will be an arduous effort. And that's the first failure of the administration. Essentially, what we have is a rogue pure nuclear power, Russia, pursuing a revisionist foreign policy designed to upend the security and the economic order, certainly in Europe, but you might also say globally. And that is a major threat to core American interests, because American security and American prosperity, and actually global security and global prosperity, is based upon the institutions we created at the end of World War II. First and foremost, NATO. So Moscow is, as it self-identifies, our number one, they consider us to be their number one adversary or enemy, as their very, very fanatical public media makes clear. And as Narishkin, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, has said explicitly, and as Putin has more or less said many, many times. And Moscow is coming for our breakfast, and they're going to eat it unless we stop them. And the administration has never said this as clearly as I just did. It's never said that the Kremlin was responsible for the cyber attacks in 2021 that disrupted oil supplies and food supplies in the United States. It's never talked about in a serious way Russian partnership with Iran and other radicals in the Middle East, designed not just to threaten Israel, but to undermine our position. And of course, it's stated from time to time, but not clearly, that Moscow's war on Ukraine, if successful, will be followed by serious provocations and perhaps aggression against our NATO allies. The president has said this from time to time. He said it in his Oval Office speech 2 or 3 weeks after the Hamas attack on Israel. He followed it up with a Washington Post editorial. Those were both excellent documents. The problem is that they live in the ether all by themselves. If the administration identified stopping international revisionists, in the first instance Russia, but also China, how that is absolutely essential to American security and American prosperity, he would be talking about a policy of containment of Russia, a policy of managing and perhaps containing China, and he would explain to the American people that the $38 billion a year that we sent to Ukraine since the big invasion, representing around or less than 4% of our defense budget, resulting in the destruction of almost 50% of Moscow's conventional military capability is actually a minor price to pay for thwarting one of our two principal enemies. The type of clarity that I've just described needs to be stated from the top of the U.S. government, the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the national security advisor, the secretary of defense, every week, multiple times. Were that to happen, it would start to be absorbed by the American people. And you would not have naifs in the Freedom Caucus of the Republican Party talking about Ukraine as a faraway land where the United States has no interests. The president is the only one in the world who has Teddy Roosevelt's bully pulpit. It's time he used it. If he were to go after this problem with the focus he's put on the green transition, we would not be having this conversation. But we need this conversation because if Moscow wins in Ukraine, we will have to face Moscow in the Baltics, in Poland, in Romania, and the shaking of American global leadership that resulted from the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan will look like a minor event compared to the blow that American leadership will face. This includes in the Western Pacific, where supposedly sophisticated foreign policy analysts claim that we don't have enough attention span and enough wherewithal to deal with Russia and China at the same time. And the whiz kid who makes that argument refuses to acknowledge that he's wrong, even after the leaders of Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea have said, you want to stop Xi from moving against Taiwan, beat Putin in Ukraine. But again, the clarity we need to define the problem has to come from the top of the administration, has to come from the president, and that's lacking. And we have many, many people who know the weapons issue better than me, including the lady sitting next to me. So I think I've made my contribution for this conversation.
Debra?
Well, how would you like me to approach this, Robert? Because there's so many ways.
Well, you have limited time, so I think whatever you think you can get in to educate the audience the best you can in your limited time.
You know, the first thing I want to say is that we have a lot of really brilliant people in the United States and in NATO who have been assessing what Ukraine did right, what they did wrong, how we would have done it differently. And as General Breedlove loves to say, we would never go to war with the assets that Ukraine has and expect to be successful. So I think it's great that these people all have many opinions, but they're not on the ground in Ukraine. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what they're facing. So a couple of things have happened. The first is, I believe that had Ukraine had air and long-range fires, ground-launched long-range fires, that they would not have had to move back from Avdiivka. Because there's an old saying that Generals Clark and Breedlove know well, is you cannot win a war with indirect fire alone. You need something more than ammunition and artillery to win that war. And there's so much lecturing going on about burn rates of what Ukraine is using, but I'll give you some numbers here. The ratio is pretty significant. Russia uses probably between 1 and 1.5 million rounds of ammunition / artillery over a period of about a month. By contrast, the US is manufacturing about 30,000 rounds a month. So I want that to sink in. I want people to understand what you're talking about. And so there's an expectation that somehow Ukraine, with probably a 7-to-1 ratio, is somehow going to defeat Russia, who is churning out this ammunition at the rate it's churning it out. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. I think the United States and Europe are going to get there in ammunition numbers, but we're nowhere near what Russia is producing and using. And I think that's something to keep in mind. So as people want to insult Ukraine and say, oh, you could have done better, please look at those numbers. The second issue I'll raise is that there's a lot of, and I think General Breedlove can talk about this even more, but there's a lot of, oh, the F-16s won't make that much of a difference. But What you're really talking about is using those aircraft in a standoff position and combining that with long-range fires to suppress very layered Russian air defense. And if you have those assets, you're not forcing troops to march through fields that are largely mined. About 80% of all the territory that Russia occupied has been landmined and on a level and extent that we've never seen in the world, in the history of the world. So you're not left to do this by ground and have your tanks and your infantry fighting vehicles to blow up if you have another way of addressing those landmines without having to put your troops out there as guinea pigs for that. The third thing I want to get into is air defense. Most of our air defense was developed, and I think General Clark can talk more about this, was developed to look at incoming going at a certain range, a certain azimuth as it flew there. It was not built to take in the level of drones, especially the Shahed drones from Iran, at the level they were coming in. So if you're a baseball or a hockey fan, think of something coming in on a line drive and not going up. So the target acquisition of those air defense things don't necessarily pick up those kamikaze drones. And as a result, we're not doing enough to develop, and it's something the US has to develop as well for its own forces, counter drone technology. We think Ukraine has a lot of educated people working on this, but you can't have an early warning system of a sound that the drone makes when it's coming in and expect to be successful against that. So that's a really significant point. So where does this leave us? I think that there has to be a greater sense of urgency of what to get you to Ukraine and what to get it there. So I'm not going to get into the machinations of the Hill on passing this budget, but there are things that allies can do more of. I'm tired of hearing that our allies are tapped out. I'll paraphrase Mette Frederiksen, the leader of Denmark, who said, "Let's give them everything we have because they're fighting a war that we now don't have to fight. Denmark's going to give all of its ammunition to Ukraine." I would like to hear that from our other allies because, frankly, the countries in the Iberian Peninsula and in Central Europe are not going to fight that war against Russia. Ukraine's fighting it. So stop complaining about emptying out your stocks because after the fact, when you replace those stocks, they're going to be replaced with systems that are more modern, more efficient, better, and more capable of countering Russia and China because you've learned lessons from Ukraine. And we understand that a lot of the weapon systems that we thought were great that we tested out in the Nevada desert or at 29 Palms don't work as well against a near peer enemy who can jam them. So we're learning a lot from this, and the result's going to be that our militaries are going to be the most modern and efficient on the face of the planet because of what we learned from Ukraine, how we're reforming troop sizes, troop formations, weapon systems, counting the jammers to counter the jammers, and so on. Now, the last point I want to make is Ukraine's a highly technical society, and they have a capacity to develop a lot of technology, and they're doing wonderful on these sort of, I call them, in America, we call them garage bands. In Ukraine, you have garage drone producers. And I think it would make sense that instead of just assuming that the West has all these technological answers, that the joint ventures lean toward doing counter-drone technology together with Ukrainians who are doing this on the fly now and take advantage of their technical expertise. And that could help the development of what we're trying to do here to protect our forces, for example, in the Red Sea now. We had the sinking of the British vessel the other day. There has to be a way to do this. I think Ukraine has that wherewithal to know how to do this, not only to defend its own country, but also to make us better at shooting down those incomings. And I'm not going to say Houthis, because let's just call it what it is, Iran, supported by Russia, by the way. And I think we could change that dynamic. So instead of looking at this as draining us, we should be looking at us at making us the best, most modernly efficient military on the face of the planet because of the lessons learned from Ukraine.
Wow, thank you very much, Deborah. I think you've done a great job of using your time to educate. Wes, it looked like you were ready to jump in with.
So thanks very much, Bob. And I'm sorry to have missed the previous panel, but I'm happy to be here now. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Look, you have to look at this as we're in the third year of a 6-year war. This is comparable in intensity and effort to World War II. And it takes a long time to respond to the kinds of attacks that Russia has made. In World War II, the Allies rushed to get into the open the Western Front, and they were slaughtered at Dieppe in 1942. It wasn't until 1944 that they made the cross-channel incursion. So if you look at the Russian obstacle belts today, you have to think that that is at least the equivalent of Rommel's West Wall in France in 1944. It's going to take detailed reconnaissance, planning, new technology, rehearsal, training, lots of troops. Everything has to be planned out. You can't just rush up to the obstacle belt, have some engineers fire some Mikliks at it and think you're going to go through. And then what are you going to do when you get through? So it's a real campaign that has to be planned. It's at least 2 years. It may be 3 years. Until that time, Ukraine has to hold. Now, I keep hearing discussions of materiel. Okay, that's what we're providing. But, probably not going to be able to obtain the superiority over Russian materiel that's required to really smash the Russians just with materiel overmatch. As Deborah said, they're firing 1 million rounds a month. Okay, if you want to beat them, you need to fire 2 million rounds a month if you're playing their game. So we're not going to do that. We have to look at what this war is really like. Unlike World War II and D-Day, we've got to worry about space, electronic warfare. The electromagnetic spectrum has got to be dominated the same way we have to dominate air. If you can't dominate air and space and the electromagnetic spectrum, you're going to have a very hard time winning this fight. So a lot of effort has got to go into thinking about how to do that. If any of you have seen the series that's now on Apple TV on air power, you recognize exactly how difficult and time-consuming and difficult this kind of a process is. And yet that's what it takes. And Ukraine is going to have to mobilize. Can't keep using up the same people. And I'm sorry, young people have to fight. It's not just the 26 and 28-year-olds. Those young people got a stake in the future of the country. And if Ukraine cannot pull together the political resolve and the means to mobilize its resources, including human resources, then this is going to be a very disappointing effort for all concerned on this side. So it's got to be mobilization. When the United States Army came out of Vietnam, we didn't consider that we were a beaten force, even though we cried about what happened to Vietnam. But we realized we had a lot of lessons to learn. So we created a framework for learning those lessons. Doctrine, training, leadership, organizations, materiel, and soldiers. When we talk about just materiel for Ukraine, we're letting them live with terrible doctrinal confusion. They're being taught by our doctrine. Half their leadership has Russian doctrine as their background. They're being taught that training's important. We think it's a tremendous combat multiplier. Russians' doctrine says training doesn't matter. give the infantryman a rifle, push him forward. We teach leadership is critical because small unit decision-making makes the difference in battle. The Russians teach drills. We believe in combined arms. The Russian schools that these Ukrainian leaders went to, they went to them before the Russians shifted to combined arms. So they know pure regiments. And we believe fundamentally in soldiers, that the battle is won at the bottom by the skill of the soldier. But to the Russians, the soldiers, like a round of ammunition, so many artillery shells, so many soldiers, use them up, get more. So we need to help the Ukrainians on a broader framework than materiel, doctrine, training, leadership, organization, soldiers, and materiel. If we're going to be successful, we've got to do that. We've got to change the U.S. industrial base so we can keep up with modern warfare. We need to reestablish the U.S. Information Agency because we're certainly losing the information battle. And we need to dedicate ourselves and recognize FDR said something that was completely off base in early 1943. At the Casablanca conference, I think it was, he said, unconditional surrender. Where did it come from? Nobody knew. But it was the critical variable that made the Allied victory possible. If it hadn't been for that, there would have been innumerable efforts to let Hitler stay, give up land, etc. We need to tell Putin, and we need to be clear with ourselves, Ukraine must get its land back. And if that means the end of Putin, so be it. Putin is not in our interest. He's doing us no favors. He doesn't need to be protected. He doesn't need an exit strategy. We don't have to worry about Russia. We shouldn't be worried about loose nukes. This is about Ukraine and the future of American leadership. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Wes. I want to go back to John and Deborah. I guess Deborah, you're there right now. Phil, I know you're listening to all this and will have plenty to say, but we're going to lose Deborah in a little bit, and I'd like you to be able to add anything in response to or to add on what Wes said. Deborah? Oh, you're muted. There you are.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm using John's computer stuff and I'm not familiar with it. I apologize. I agree with what Wes said, with a couple of interesting exceptions. I think that there is an acknowledgement now that the sort of training that we've been doing at Wiesbaden is sort of good for what it's done, but not good enough. And there's a decision to open up a new NATO sort of training center in Poland, which would do much more in terms of integrating this. And so I think that's all great for the future of Ukraine's force, so it becomes more interoperable and integrated with NATO forces. I don't think, however, it's addressing the immediate issues. So there's a couple things I'd say, Wes. One, reclama about mobilization of forces. I think included in that mobilization, there has to be an understanding that you don't necessarily want to mobilize the people who are doing the drone technology and the technical issues, that should be part of the mobilization. In other words, there are young men and women who are making these drones, who are coming up with cyber counterattack and that sort of thing. That should be considered part of that force. And just because they're civilians doesn't mean that they then should be mobilized to put a rifle in their hand, because what they're contributing is equally as important. And so, whereas we have our cyber commands and northern commands and strategic commands and the like, Ukraine doesn't have that. So there's going to be a huge civilian component that should not be mobilized for, shooting weapons and riding in tanks, because that part is just as essential for the development of systems and for command and control and the like. So I just, it's not that we disagree, it's just that they're not going to be wearing a uniform, but they're still critically participating in that war, and they make a huge difference. That's a force multiplier for them, that whole technological basis. So that's one part. The other part of this is, I think we have to stop assuming that we have all the answers to how Ukraine should fight this war. General Breedlove and a couple of other wise, I don't want to say graybeards because I don't want to insult anyone, told me a long time ago that we tend to train and educate others based on the last war we fought and not necessarily on the war that we're fighting now. And so I would argue that a lot of what we were providing to Ukraine came from 22 years of counterinsurgency, came from this, as General Clark put it, training and doctrine commands that looked at that, but not necessarily what's actually going on in Ukraine today. And so when you use those same training and doctrine commands with a different force and a different kind of war, the outcome's not going to be so great as we've seen. And so I think we need to get off of our collective high horses and understand that this is also a learning process for us and not just for Ukraine, and that we don't have all the answers. And John, do you want to say some final words before we?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Well, you're fine. I'm glad you're fine.
I just missed the last 5 minutes, so I didn't feel I had something relevant to add at this point. And when I'm coming out of left field, and you've got such a great team there.
No, and before you guys go, I do want to tell our audience, and I want to thank both of you. Not only are you experts in your field, you're invaluable members of the Friends of Ukraine network, and both of you are day in and day out pushing to get our government to do what it needs to do. And I want our audience to know that that's your life. You're living it right now, and we're all benefiting from your efforts. And so I thank you for joining us this morning before you have to go to your next meeting.
It's also going to push the cause forward.
Yeah. It's with friends and partners of Ukraine, so that's
right.
Positive.
We're going to open a new front.
Phil, you've heard everyone so far. Take it away.
Great, thanks. And this is a great bunch to be among people I admire and follow. So I think the best way for me to contribute now, I've sort of changed 3 little points I'd like to make. I'm often asked, what does Ukraine need now? What do we need to give Ukraine now? And the approach that our nation and others have taken across the past 10 years of this war, not the last 2 years, as people like to say, but the last 10 years of this war, is we tend to focus on what I call shiny objects. It's the next shiny object. It's the javelin. Oh boy. Then it's the tank. Oh boy. Then it's the cluster munition ATACMS. Oh boy. And so I think that we need to get off that. We need to stop thinking about how to win is another new shiny object. We need to think about the sum of the parts. It is systems of systems that will win this war. And I'm going to use the F-16 and maneuver warfare as an example. First, maneuver warfare. A few months ago, people were being very critical of Ukraine. Why are they fighting this static fight when we taught them how to fight maneuver warfare? Well, in a short answer, they're not fighting maneuver warfare, because we haven't given them the parts and pieces they need to fight maneuver warfare. In the West, and certainly in America, just as General Clark mentioned a few minutes ago, the ability to use all elements of the U.S. military to establish battlefield air superiority is the #1 task in establishing maneuver warfare. And we have not, I'm going to say this 3 times, we have not given Ukraine what they need to establish battlefield air superiority. We haven't even come close. And so when we start being critical of how Ukraine does business, we need to look at, have we equipped them to do what we expected of them and ask them to do? So to be able to affect maneuver warfare and to come from this static fight they see and to fight maneuver warfare the way the West does it, we need to start with the ability to use all elements of air power, much bigger than the Air Force, Army Air, Navy Air, Marine Air, and Air Force Air, to be able to protect our soldiers so then they can do their work on the ground to exploit that maneuver warfare that we like to fight. So a couple of things that we are in short supply of now is, of course, local air superiority and the ability to transform our Air Force from providing battlefield air support to becoming a modern maneuver supporting Air Force that attacks in close air support, air interdiction, and all the modes that would enable Ukraine to change the face of this battlefield. It's going to be bigger than a few F-16s. And frankly, we're not going to get to the size we need in Ukraine because right now the United States is not contributing any F-16s. They're counting only on the Europeans to do this. We are going to put F-16 and are putting F-16s in the graveyard that are better equipped and more up to date than the F-16s our allies are supplying. We could get Ukraine's Air Force to a higher level of capability quicker if we supplied some of the aircraft we are retiring in America. We need to give the battlefield commander long-range precise artillery. General Clark, my buddy, now the Secretary of Defense, none of us or them would have went to war if someone says you're not going to be able to use your long-range artillery, precise artillery. And we have withheld this from Ukraine, and we're doing it on a policy vice, do we have it to give? And so right now, the next step would be the high explosive unitary warhead long-range ATACMS, which would provide Ukraine with the ability to strike the length and depth of Crimea and to strike the Kerch Bridge if they wanted to. And so just as a recap, a lot of good stuff has been said. It's not about shiny objects. It's about a system of systems. It's about giving the commander the ability to protect his troops, strike at range, and enable the ground forces, which are going to have to win this war for Ukraine.
Wes, can we jump back to you?
Sure. So, one of the things that when Debra brings up how we fought and taught them the wrong thing, and what Phil is saying, I totally agree with. But I want to take a step back. We came out of the Vietnam War recognizing we had to look at a different battlefield, and we developed something called a concept-based requirement system. And so the question is for Ukraine, what is the concept of the battle that they're seeking to win? What is the defeat mechanism going to be? How do they win this battle? You have to work backwards from that concept to put together the doctrine, training, organization, leaders, material, and so forth to win it. We're throwing resources at them. But do they have the concept for how to win? That's the question. Now, I'm told there's already training in Wiesbaden going on, and there's a new plan being concocted. Great. But what's the defeat mechanism? Too often in our planning, we plan from the line of departure forward. You can't plan that way, either tactically or strategically. You have to plan from the end state and work backwards. And I know we're not doing that in the U.S. policy sense, because the only way that the policy of the United States makes any sense is if the end state is a stalemate. And to plan for a stalemate and use Ukrainian lives and the nation for that purpose, to expend it that way, it's immoral, it's unethical, and it's unlikely to work. You can't precisely calculate a stalemate in warfare. The Russians are adaptive, smart, capable, got a lot of resources. They're not dummies. We think they're dummies because their way of war treats a soldier like a bullet. Just expend him. We don't do that. We value our soldiers. We think we win with our soldiers. They think they win with maneuver and mass. And so we've got to be very careful. We have to have the concept for victory that we work backwards from to be successful in this campaign, not just a matter of throwing material at them.
Yeah, in that context, and I guess I asked both of you this, we're talking about leadership, and we've commented about the leadership we need here in Washington, but we're also talking about leadership in Ukraine. What do you think the change in the military leaders in Ukraine recently has had or is going to have on the conduct of the war? I think both of you know the individuals involved. Just your comments. Phil?
I'll jump out there first. I think that the change at the top of the Ukrainian military is clearly the purview of the civilian leadership in Ukraine. Whether we like an individual or not, I think the concept that we so support here in America is civilian control of the military. And so what is unfortunate is whether that works for the rest of the military on the ground. I think every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine needs and has the right to look up and have confidence in the leaders selected above them. And I believe, and General Clark may or may not support me on this, but I believe a force fights differently when they respect their bosses. Sometimes they love them, sometimes they don't, but when they respect them and what they can and can't do, it's really important. And so my prayer at this moment is that the line troops in Ukraine look up and see a command that is responsive and understands them and will use them in a way that affects the battlefield objectives of the civilian leadership.
Yeah, I think it's a strange. It's hard to really project this. It's too early, but it's very strange. You know, in Ukraine, in 2014, when the fighting started, they couldn't use the military directly. They had to call it an anti-terrorist organization, an ATO. The military wasn't authorized to command it, even though they put the military into it. They fought mostly defensive battles. We're in the fourth phase. They were successful in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 as positional warfare. Now we're in phase 4 of the battle. General Syrski is an experienced commander. He's got a good reputation from phases 1 and 2. He was successful, but it's just too early to say. This is a dynamic environment. He's got to wrestle with all the things that are going on. Manpower. Does he get them? U.S. support. When's that stuff coming in? Holding the line. He's got to be able to form up a reserve force. He can't commit everything for the defense. He's got to take risks enough to pull out reserves. He's got to roll over the force and train people. But look, it may be another generation, 2 years plus into a 6-year war. That's the way we have to see this. A lot of lessons learned. Got to be honest. They have to be honest with themselves. We have to be honest with ourselves. It's just too early to pass any judgment on it. I will tell you that when you make these wholesale changes, it does take a while for people to settle into their new positions. So for General Sirski, sure, but also the people around him have changed, and it's not like he's going into the team and it's just a different coach. This is a whole new team, all the way down to the brigade level, apparently. Lots and lots of changes. So there's a lot of, some of it learning personalities, some of it's learning doctrine. They are still caught between Russian doctrine that the senior leaders learned and what we've tried to tell them in U.S. and Western troop leading procedures about how to give an order, how to get the staff involved, how to take responsibility, how to be honest. When I taught a class over there in 2016 to the bunch of generals on how we did our training, I emphasized the after action review, honest discussion of what's right and what's wrong, what happened, why did it happen, how to do better the next time. One of the Ukrainian generals came up to me afterwards and said, well, he said, General, he said, that's very good for the Americans, but we're trained on the Russian model. We protect critical information, and that means we lie to each other. So he was only being half facetious. He was telling me there was a real problem even then. So the thing about it in war is telling the truth is really hard, because your reputation, your future, your men's future, everything's at stake, and it's life and death. And so for an officer to come up and say, I really made a mistake, I didn't get the order out in time. Okay, you lost 40 people because of that. That's a really tough thing to ask of an organization. And that's trying to do all this and still defend Ukraine against the Russians and build a force that can do something like a D-Day operation to break through the Russian defenses. Boy, we're asking a lot.
I see Phil shaking his head. Yes, that's profound. It's sobering. And yet I have the sense that both of you think that Ukraine still has a tremendous potential to win this thing with the right support. Am I missing anything there?
So you've heard me talk before, Bob. I think that it's not well received in circles inside of DC, but it is my opinion that this war will end exactly as Western policymakers want it to end. I think there's 3 possible outcomes. If we cease support to Ukraine, Ukraine will fight valiantly. Lots of Ukrainian soldiers, lots of Ukrainian civilians will be lost, but Ukraine will fall. If we continue to do what we're doing today and make little or no changes, unfortunately, I believe in the end game, Ukraine will fall, because it is my opinion, may not be shared by many, but it is my opinion that we are not giving Ukraine what they need to win. We are giving Ukraine enough to remain viable on the battlefield in hopes that Ukraine will eventually come to the table and negotiate an end to the war. And we are doing this because we in the West are intellectually and morally incapable of envisioning a Russian defeat or a defeated Putin. Mr. Putin has absolutely deterred the West, and specifically the United States of America. And we are not really ready at this point to think about a Ukrainian win and what that might entail. In the third instance, I do believe, having watched Ukraine defeat Russia on the north side of Kyiv, having watched Ukraine defeat Russia on the north and northwest side of Kharkiv, and being operationally moving towards good positions in the south right up until we started cutting back on our support. I believe Ukraine is capable of defeating Russia if we give them what they need. And I would offer that they need what we would need if we went to the battlefield. And that's a pretty different list than what we're giving Ukraine right now.
I know that Phil, you heard this, and I thought, back up, I thought a week or so ago, the Washington Post, Ignatius was writing, we need to give Ukraine the long-range precision missiles, and he's usually, it seems to me, has his pulse on what's coming out of the West Wing. And then there were reports that the United States was leaning toward giving the long-range ATACMS. I wondered, when Putin did his little rant, more so than he's done before, about nuclear weapons last week, I wondered how chilling that was on whatever leaning was going on. And you and I heard yesterday that, well, we haven't taken them off the table. It's not very encouraging. That all brings me to a question that one of our listeners has asked about the intimidation, the nuclear threat, and so forth. Could you comment on this nuclear threat that is used, once a week or so, and its impact, and whether it's something we should be deterred by? I'll start with you, Phil, because you're up on the screen here.
The bottom line is, before the latest round of this fight started, I again assert that we've been at war for 10 years. But before this latest round started, I mean, we rushed to tell Russia many things. We took a bunch of stuff off the table right off the bat. No boots on the ground. We're not going to allow Ukraine to shoot into Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We gave those assurances to Russia before the war started. And then we also told them, what we're afraid of. We told them that we're going to make every effort to avoid lateral escalation of this fight, widening of the war, whatever words you want to use. And we told them and assured them that we were going to take every step to avoid a nuclear issue. Now, I'm not saying that those are things that we don't want to have happen. Those are noble things for us to seek. But to rush to tell Russia what we are fearful of, I think, was a mistake. And so what we see is Russia plays this back to us on a very regular basis. We're assured by someone at a very high echelon in Russia, Mr. Putin, Lavrov, the next echelon of apparatniks there, all of those folks are fairly constantly in the press and writing or at conferences talking about something that the West is doing and that it will lead to nukes, or we're abrogating this treaty, or if you let them shoot into Russia, it's nukes. We are constantly reminded by Russia about the possibility of nuclear war because we told Russia this is what makes us fearful. And secondarily, at a less frequent rate, but still at a very frequent rate, Russia reminds us that anything, and it's been tanks, it's been javelins, all these things they said would lead to a wider war. And about half the time they talk about it's going to lead to a wider war, they add the extra caveat of, and of course, American soldiers will once again die on European battlefields. And so we told them what we were fearful of, and they play this back to us all the time. And they expect us, and they have been successful so far, and we have met their expectations. This does deter us in the actions that we take. Joel Clark will now grade my paper.
Well, I think
Bet or bet Hallmark.
I think Phil said it exactly right. And I want to just elaborate on this a little bit. So starting in the late 1950s, the Soviets decided they would run an information warfare campaign against nuclear weapons because they were inferior to us. So they set up the Committee on Nuclear Disarmament. It was headquartered in London. It was run by the Communist Party of UK covertly. And a lot of well-meaning people became peaceniks, as we called them in those days. It died out, but then they rejuvenated it again in the 1980s when we were looking at worried about theater nuclear modernization in Europe. So for a period of, let's say, 60 some odd years, the West has been told nuclear weapons are bad, ugly, evil, destroy, nuclear winter. Lots of horrible predictions, movies, Mad Max, and other things like this that show the aftermath of a nuclear war. Thing is, the Russians, starting really with the Cuban Missile Crisis, realized how important nuclear weapons were. So they went for nuclear strategic superiority. First, they got equivalents. That was assault treaties in the 1980s. They went for a nuclear war winning capacity with protection of the key leadership and the ability to survive and reconstitute following a nuclear exchange. And then when we stopped work on the neutron bomb, they kept going. So they have a fourth generation nuclear weapon right now. They have tactical weapons. They have theater weapons. They have Putin's big drone underseas that supposedly can go in and put a 100 megaton warhead in the harbor. They've got the ability to put nuclear weapons in space. They have hypersonic missiles that are protected by a plasma shield that don't show up on radar. They have fractional orbital bombs that are launched toward the South Pole that you won't pick up on radar. That might come at us over Mexico. Yeah. So Putin believes he has strategic nuclear superiority. So he's not just bluffing. He's telling you the truth from his perspective. And what the Biden administration has done is failed to recognize that we've coasted for too long on our nuclear deterrent. We still have a second strike capability. It's still survivable, but we don't have mutual assured destruction. We don't have the Russian side acknowledging it. We don't have deterrence. When Putin threatened us, we had people saying, well, you can use conventional weapons to get nuclear-like effects. Really? You think a few F-16s flying over Crimea can create nuclear-like effects with JDAMs? I don't think so. And so we're going to have to face that we're in a new era. There's a constellation of nations forming up against us. They're willing to use force, witness Ukraine, 7.5% hike in the Chinese defense budget announced. No telling what's behind the scenes with that. Xi Jinping wants a world-class force by 2027. Iran's about to become a nuclear power. They may already have a nuclear weapon. When they do, everything changes in the Middle East. We worried about North Korea for years. They are a nuclear power. And so, look, this is a really tough period for us. And we can't simply say it's business as usual. Maybe we can get Mr. Putin to agree to strategic arms talks. Really? Why would he do that? He's winning. Maybe we can deal with Putin as a responsible statesman. Really? You think he's responsible after this? Look, we have to face that we're in a new era. We've got to reemphasize hard power. We've got to reinvest in our deterrent. And more than that, we've got to stand up for our values and be willing to risk the confrontation here in Ukraine, or we're going to have it on a 2,500-mile front in NATO in 2 years. I know this is a bitter pill for the administration in a presidential election year, but in 2021, 2022, there was an election coming up. That's democracy. It's time for us as responsible citizens to say we have a commitment to this country, to our freedom, to our democracy, and we're prepared to fight for it. If we believe the rules-based international order is so significant, well, then we better get ready to fight for it because it's under attack right now.
And it's being fought in Ukraine
Absolutely.
by Ukrainians.
Right.
Could I add just a slant to that as well? I just came off a different video right before this one, and one of the questions was how is our policy towards Taiwan being accepted around the world? And I answered it's associated with this discussion we just had. I said that, listen, we can print, we can talk about, we could go on TV and discuss our policy towards Taiwan all we want. But our real policy towards Taiwan, what the world sees our policy about Taiwan is being written every day in Ukraine. What America does as a friend and ally is going to be understood as the world watches how we handle Ukraine, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just want to come back to one of the questions, and this from James Gilmore. Biden has decided not to run the risk of escalation. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. He's willing to fight for as long as it takes until Ukraine gives up or Russia gives up, as long as we don't have to get involved and take a risk of escalation. It's a slow motion rollout of Munich 1938. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it looks like, and that's what it feels like.
And just one more addition to that. I am now using these terms, but I did not coin them, so I think they're interesting, wise, but not my words. So paying tribute to someone else, but not their name, based on academic freedom and Chatham House rules. I heard an individual say it this way just the other day. We in the West are willing to trade Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian military, and Ukrainian territory for our safety. And that last personal pronoun is really important in that sentence, meaning we're willing to sacrifice what's going on in Ukraine so that we don't have to face a widening war or a nuclear threat. And I think that's a pretty tough conversation to thwart.
Well, that's Munich, Phil. That was exactly what Neville Chamberlain did at Munich. He thought he had stopped a war in 1938 by giving Sudetenland to Hitler. The Poles and the Hungarians demobilized. He went home. You know, he knew Britain wasn't ready to fight a war, and he thought he had stopped it because the memory of World War I was so devastating, especially in Britain, where they lost as they always say, they lost a whole generation of young men. To us, the thought of a nuclear confrontation is so frightening that we're willing to. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Well, you know, one thing, and I may be wrong on this, but I think it was you, Wes, made the point that often is forgotten, that World War II was started by two allies, Stalin and Hitler, and that when Hitler turned on Stalin, he became our ally. But at the end of that war, only one of the nations that had started it was defeated and had to face the consequences. The Soviet Union never did, never has. And while the Soviet Union itself doesn't exist, the Kremlin and Putin they've never faced the consequences of having been defeated. And they're not going to stop until they are defeated. And the Ukrainians are willing to do it if we give them what they need. I can understand if you're the president of the United States and you've got that responsibility, you have got to factor in very, very seriously what you've so aptly described as Russia's nuclear superiority. But you also have to think, would they really use it? I mean, we still have that second strike capability. And I think it may have been you again, Wes, that said if Putin has proved anything about his bottom line characteristics, it's self-preservation. And so escalation is a concern, but it backing away and being self-deterred is not only costing lives and more in Ukraine. I think it's heading us down a road that we will be in much worse shape, and we will be having to face that aggressor ourselves if we don't make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to win.
You know, Bob, many of us on this call, we didn't understand the policy at first. I remember we were sitting here arguing, put an air expeditionary force into Romania, do exercises with the Ukrainian Air Force, create the ambiguity that is the essence of deterrence. We're just, it was just hot air because the administration had already made the decision it wasn't going to do that. We pulled our trainers out of Yavoriv training area. That would have been a deterrent because and a couple of days after the war started, I called the White House and spoke to a high-ranking person and asked them to please, if you believe in a rules-based international order, you have to believe the airspace still belongs to Ukraine. And if Ukraine's asking for air, should give it to them. It's their airspace, not Russia's. And that's when I began to understand what the policy was.
We have 15 minutes, and a couple of our listeners have brought this up, and it was discussed a little bit in the previous panel, but I'll raise it because some people think it's the definitive issue before us. And in the previous panel, both Kurt Volker and Paula Dobryansky talking about their recent trips to Europe, the consternation about where we are as a country, but then the other factor, what if Trump wins? And what will that change? Or do we know what it will change? Comments. I think, it's the elephant in the room. It's worth commenting on what we see there. He's clearly having an influence on the quote unquote Freedom Caucus, which I said in the last panel, they don't seem to be for freedom, but they call themselves the Freedom Caucus. Your thoughts about possible change of presidencies?
I'm going to defer to my senior officer.
Yeah. Well, I know this. I know what John Bolton has said about Mr. Trump, and I'll just repeat that because he knows him a lot better than I do. And he said that he would, seriously try to pull out of NATO. I know what he said to the man who was going to be the new ambassador to Germany. At least I know secondhand what he said, which was, get U.S. troops out of Germany. So I have to take Trump at his word. He's a very transparent leader. He tells you what he's going to do. Now, he doesn't always do that, and sometimes he comes up with things that he hadn't thought to tell you. But if he tells you what he's going to do, you should take him at his face value.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe that NATO is worth it. He doesn't believe it's in the United States' interest. He feels he wants a more transactional policy. And that means that countries that come to us for help don't get it unless they pay and it makes sense for us. That's the America First doctrine. And here we are, talking about assisting Ukraine because we're trying to explain that it's in our interest to assist Ukraine. But that depends on your time frame. If you're just interested about the next election, maybe it's not in your interest. But everything in American politics is it's fundamentally unpredictable. I know because I ran for office, and I know that you don't follow those opinion polls. And I know that people will say what they think they need to say to get elected. And what they do when they're in office is something else. So I cannot predict the outcome of the election. I can just say that there are strong American interests in NATO, in Europe, and in supporting Ukraine. And I think regardless of who wins the election, those interests will manifest themselves in policy.
I do believe, and I've said before, I don't do politics, so I'm not going to talk about the individual. But I believe our nation was created with three branches of government, and it was created to have a tension that those three branches created. And I do not believe that any one branch of our government could do this by itself, remove ourselves from an alliance like NATO. And so I do believe that while for decades, even the Supreme Court didn't really get that involved in international affairs or whatever, but we now have a court that is willing to step into the processes of the other two branches. We have a branch that still feels like it controls the purse and what is and is not paid for and how things happen. And then we have another branch that is trying to do its executive function. And I have confidence that all three branches of our government would be fairly involved in anything as consequential as removing ourselves from the NATO alliance. And I would hope, and I would have some amount of confidence that something like that would not happen on just the whim of one.
Well, I mean, I think, we've all three of us sort of struggle with exactly what to say because we cannot predict the politics. It's still months and months before the election. A lot of things can go on. Politicians running for office, whether they be for president or Senate or House, are saying a lot of different things, and in many cases reading polls to know what they should be saying or coming out for. And I think, like Wes says, in office, you have to face the realities of the world that you're in. And as everybody has emphasized, we're in a very troubling time across the globe. And whoever is president and whoever is advising that president and whoever is in Congress and on those committees and so forth is going to face the reality of the world that is there come January 1st next year. So I don't know that we've answered the question or given the questioner, a kind of response that they'd like, but I don't think you can predict all these things, policy-wise, election-wise, and so forth. But what we can do is continue as Friends of Ukraine Network, which both of you are on, and Debra and John are on, continue to press individually and collectively our government to do what we believe needs to be done to support Ukraine so that it can win this fight and defeat Russia and change the course of where things seems to be going right now. We've got 6 or 7 minutes. I've looked at some of the questions. I'll try and deal with those maybe a bit later, but
I have to apologize. I've got to jump on an airplane.
Oh,
I've got to close that suitcase behind me and race out of the house. I'm sorry I screwed up. Should have been here for the first panel, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and great pleasure to be with Phil Breedlove and earlier with Debra and John. Thank you, Bob, and thank you for all the great work you're doing for our country and for Ukraine.
well, thank you, Wes, and I know we missed you on the first panel, but we got full full workout of you on the second one. Have a safe trip, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Phil, it's not
Yes.
doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a lightning round. Closing comments and thoughts. I mean, the title of this panel was "Victory for the People of Ukraine: What is Needed?" And we've talked about that, but would you like to summarize where you think we
Well,
are?
I would, and I think that this was part of what John said, but I do know Deborah's mind pretty well too, as well as Joel Clark, and I think we would all say that the first thing we need is a clear policy. We need our government to state what is the goal in Ukraine. We don't use them anymore because now people understand. But we used to say all the time that, we're going to be there as long as it takes. And we're going to give them everything they need. And for those of us who are military and have to take those words and turn them into action, those are incomplete sentences. We're going to be there for as long as it takes to do what? We're going to give them everything they need to do what? And the to do what is the most important part of the statement, because now you can start putting logistical planning, weapons planning, and all that behind. And so I think the first and most important thing that we should give the people of Ukraine is a vision for what America is there to do. We have heard over and over again that the polling in Ukraine is consistently extremely high, that the Ukrainian people and their leadership want all of the Russians out of all of Ukraine. In other words, that we should, none of us, tolerate that Russia would amass its military might, cross an internationally recognized border, and subjugate the people of a neighboring nation. And so our statements, "will be there as long as it takes," should go, "will be there as long as it takes to completely expel Russia from Ukraine, sovereign Ukrainian territory. We will give Ukraine everything they need to completely eliminate Russia from sovereign Ukrainian territory." And if we simply made a very, very public, unequivocal statement like that, so that Russia understands our commitment, rather than this sort of incomplete set of sentences we use, I think that's the most important thing that we could give Ukraine up front.
Meaning, in part, living up to the Budapest Memorandum. Exactly.
Very few people have ever read the Budapest Memorandum.
Yes. And there are very few people that want it referred to in our government. The point you made, and this is redundant, it was made in the previous panel. It's been covered a couple of times here. But I do want to say the Friends of Ukraine Network every year come out with recommendations for priority recommendations for U.S. assistance to Ukraine. And in February of last year's recommendations, the first one under immediate actions, unequivocal statement of the United States support for Ukrainian victory. We've been pushing it for quite some time, and we haven't gotten it yet. But you're right. That's what's needed. A strategic decision. Once that's made, all sorts of actions stem from it, and they would be actions that aren't being taken right now. Phil, appreciate your time. Appreciate your efforts. I know you travel the country on your own. You've traveled for the Friends of Ukraine Network. You're interviewed constantly, and your message is important. I think I wish more people, I think the people in the West Wing and the State Department and the Defense Department hear it. I want more of them to take it to heart. But I thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your friendship, and the same thing goes for John Herbst and Deborah and Wes. And this panel, we will sign off